Hey, it's Meg. Welcome back to my channel. So today's junk journal with me, I'm going to create a page entirely from scraps for my background. So if you have seen one of my videos before, it's probably no surprise to you that I keep everything and anything when it comes to papers, from packaging or those little bits of leftover pieces that you have from other projects. Like sometimes I think maybe this is too small, like I don't need to save this. And then I end up putting it in the box that I showed you just there. I literally save anything, collect all the bits and pieces, because I tell myself that because I work in a smaller journal, like normally around about A6-ish size, so like a 4 by 6 inches. So in my mind, I'm like, well, the piece is small, but it would actually work really well in the size of journal that I have. So I end up saving pretty much everything, as you'll see, but I really love to use it within my backgrounds. So what I do is I build them up and layer them in different areas and create like clusters, and that's something that I really love to do within my normal layouts. But I thought for the prompt of scraps that we're doing today for Junk Journal July, I thought, well, what better day to literally just go all out and do all of the scraps of papers. So you can see here I'm just going through all the different bits and pieces and picking out the things that I might like to use. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the different textures, the different colours, what might complement, what might contrast. It's always fun to kind of have some different like colours. I don't want to say clashing, because normally I do tend to stick to quite a safe for me colour palette. Like normally I'll be doing neutrals and browns, some pinks, some like greens, like leafy greens. I will just tend to stick within that colourway. Sometimes things will have like coffee dye, like splotches on them, or bits of paint because they are leftovers. So there's nothing that is uniform. They're all different shapes and sizes. So sometimes I might trim them down or use certain sections in order to make it work for a page. But you can see I just went through and picked out some bits that I might like to use, all within a similar colourway. So I think if this is something you want to try, I definitely say that picking similar colours can help you to come up with something that's a bit more cohesive, because even if you are sticking them in like a random assorted order, or you are using different textures, if they are the same colour, then things will tend to look a lot nicer to the eye when you look at them, and that way you can create a bit more of a background that goes together. So I thought about the ways that this background could kind of work as something to add things on top of, but also I just wanted it to be something that could stand alone by itself, and have the areas of detail and little intricacies. So I was thinking about the little areas that were having a moment on their own almost, and then how that would go together for the entire spread. So I had this page here on the right hand side. So I've opened up my no-sew journal for this, which is another perfect example of why I absolutely love a no-sew journal, because I was just able to open it up flat and work on the page that I wanted to. But it was also fun because the way that the pages go together meant that I got to work on what would traditionally be the right hand side of one page, and then when you flip it over, the left hand side. So I mean, technically I've kind of created two pages for this prompt, because they aren't on the same spread, if that makes sense. Like when you open it up in the no-sew journal, it looks like one spread, but because of the way that I've done them across the fold, so rather than left and right, I've done it right and left, like the opposite. I hope that makes sense. So I've kind of technically done two spreads, which is a fun concept to do for this journal. So when I fold it up at the end, you'll see that it actually creates two separate pages, but they do go together at the same time. And I really enjoyed the process of putting this together, because it's such a relaxing technique to use because you don't need to think too much about what you're doing. You can just glue down the different papers, and if you end up not liking a particular area, but it's already like glued down and you can't peel it back off, you can always just cover it up with something else and just layer things up and work towards a layout that you do like. Or if you're feeling very nervous about adding it to your page, you could do it like a masterboard and do it on a separate piece of paper, like the back of an envelope or something, and then glue it into your journal as well. You don't have to go straight onto your journal. And also having the background from the patchwork effect that I had done for the no-sew journal meant that I had something to work on. Like I already had a base that I was able to work with, so I wasn't starting from a completely clean slate, and I think that made the process a lot easier because say where I already had like a piece of brown paper and some book paper together, I could use that as a jumping off point to overlap some papers, and it already looked like it had something going on, and then I just needed to add my smaller bits. So something you could do would be to start with some larger pieces and then work your way down to smaller pieces. That's something I always say with my collage, is you just have to think about it in terms of your backgrounds, your middle grounds and your foregrounds, which is basically just a fancy way of saying your big pieces, your middle pieces, and then your tiny pieces. You just have to work from big pieces to smaller pieces, and that way then you'll find the layering a lot easier, because if you put down some smaller pieces, you'll find it a lot harder then to work in the larger pieces. So that's just the way that I find it easiest to think about when I'm doing this, even though I said that this is something I enjoy because I don't have to think. But you know, there's just things that you'll pick up as you go if you are doing this sort of technique within your journal. And yeah, it's just one of my favorites. I love to add my papers this way. It adds so much interest and detail, and you end up with those really nice areas of contrast and texture and all those lovely things. I had finished with my collaging and adding all of the paper scraps to the page, I then decided to enhance that a little bit by adding some other details. So I added some of those floral ribbons there. They are by the brand MU, and I really like to have them overlapping the different papers, and I chose some areas that were a bit more plain so that they would show up nicely on top of the papers. And then I also added some washi tape. These are some by the brand Note and Wish. I really love the ones that have the script over them in these neutral colours. They're almost like old paper, and I thought that they would be perfect to add to a page like this to give that kind of scrappy feel to them. And then I also have this PET sample that I thought might be nice, one of the florals to add on, because these tend to really like melt into the page. I was wanting to pick things that wouldn't stand out a lot, so like this PET and the rub-ons that melt into the page and blend into everything that I've got going on. I didn't want things to just feel like they were stuck on top of it, and that's what I think helps the background to pull together a little bit. Oftentimes I'll go in with white acrylic paint or tissue paper to try and achieve this effect, but I wanted to experiment a little bit more with kind of letting the paper scraps do all the talking and then just being able to add these embellishments that were a lot more subtle but that helped to bring everything that was underneath them together. And so yeah, I didn't want to cover anything up too much, which was then a challenge when I was thinking, okay, I love the way this page is turning out, but it needs some sort of focal point, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I had this scrap of, I think it was the backing off something, so I thought, well, that's perfect to use for a prompt like this, but it was a little bit too big, and as I was putting it round the page, I thought, well, there isn't anywhere that I actually want to cover up, so I decided to trim it down a little bit, make it smaller, and then used it as a bit of a journal spot almost. So I used my white paint pen here just to add a bit of a border to add some contrast, and then I actually just stapled it onto the page, which was really easy with the no-sew format to be able to do this just from either side of the journal. And then for the text that I wanted to add onto this page, I ended up using this stamped piece, which is actually also from the brand Note and Wish, and it's a quote that's kind of about travel in a way, because it's a German word that I won't try and pronounce, but it's a feeling of longing to depart and to explore far off places, literal translations, far woe. So I thought that that was perfect for adding to this page. The print itself is not great, but I actually think that I really like the effect that that gives to the page, because it's almost like this isn't perfect, and neither are all of these paper scraps that I've added to my page. It's really like a collection of all these different things and all these different projects, and it's funny looking at it because I can kind of see different elements of things that I've worked on in the past, so it's quite nice to be able to bring those all together within one page. So of course I wanted to add some final details and mark making to my pages. I think especially on a background like this where I've got all these different papers going on, it can be quite nice to add some marks over the top of the different papers, because it can bring things together. So I'm using my favourite Neo color here just because this works, I find, really well on top of a lot of different papers. It's very opaque. And then I actually used a purplish pastel pencil. Now I have this collection of pastel pencils that I never really seem to use, because how am I going to use pastel pencils? I had them years ago. I bought them completely by mistake, not knowing that they were actually pastel pencils. Don't ask me why or how, but I have them and I'm trying to think of ways to use them, because I just find pastels so messy and they smudge. But I thought, you know what, maybe I can use it and lean into it a little bit. So I was adding my little marks, and then I was sort of smudging them out already so that they didn't then smudge unintentionally. And it did add some nice effects to some of the pieces, especially the collage papers that were more on the pink side. It added a little bit of depth to those, and so that was nice in a few different areas to add, just as something different, because I don't tend to add this sort of medium to my journal pages. So it was just fun to experiment with that for a little bit and see how it might work out on my page. And looking back at the details that I added to this page as a final touch, I realised I actually didn't add any white dots. So there's a change, that I didn't add any white pen detailing to this. I mean, maybe once I have finished this voiceover, I might actually go and add some white marks to this page, because I can see some areas that might benefit from that. But that is everything for today's junk journal with me. I hope you enjoyed journaling along with me today.